You're on mute.
There we go. Or
Perfect.
your link. That's pretty handy. Good morning. Or good afternoon, as the case may be. It's good to see you all. And I look forward to a conversation about what you want to know about participating in FSA programs, USDA, or anything that can draw from the background that I've had the good fortune to develop. I feel like I'm not doing my job by the next generation if I don't share every single shortcut that I have discovered in my 56 and a half years doing this, living, that is. And a lot of those shortcuts come after finding a lot of wrong ways to try to do things. And in exploring those wrong ways, you find the solution. And it's incumbent upon those of us that find those solutions to share them with our friends, with our colleagues, with our tribe, if you will. I think to me, that's the essence of tribalism, is we all knew that if one of us found a better way and we shared it with everybody else, the whole group of us is going to do better. So I'll give a little bit of my background so that we can better frame the set of questions that you may have on your mind. And then I'll stop there and see if there are any questions to guide us in the discussion. And then I've got canned speeches that I can go into for the next 32 hours if we need to. So hopefully you got some questions. Right now, I'm currently working with Native Ag Financial Services and others in the country to try to continue to build improved financial delivery services, improve agriculture finance so that producers have better outcomes, so that they're able to retain more of their production income from their ag operation and have a little choice in what it is that they're trying to do in the world instead of have that dictated by a banker at the end of the production season. Immediately prior to this, I had the tremendous good fortune of being your FSA administrator. And I would always introduce myself that way, as your FSA administrator, because in my estimation, public service means being available to the public. So at every event, eventually I even got the team convinced that it should be on the website. I would give out my government phone number and folks were invited to use it, and many did. By that same token, if I'm going to be any kind of guide to you in anything that we're doing, you all should have my contact information, and that'll be on my website, fifthc.finance. Maybe, maybe not yet, but I'll give it to you here. I'll type it into the chat box so that you can all reach out to me with your questions individually, because we're now part of the same tribe because we're sharing the same mission. So I got to be the Farm Services Agency Administrator for President Biden and Secretary Vilsack. And during our time there, we got to really implement some meaningful changes in policy. But some of the most relevant and most meaningful changes that we were able to implement were actually in the mindset of the staff. We'll come back to all of that as I go through my background and answer your questions, but I'm going to make a note here to remind me. Right before serving as your FSA administrator, I got the distinct honor of being the third executive director ever at the Intertribal Agriculture Council, an entity that I started working for first way back in the 90s as a broke rancher who needed part-time employment and fell in love with because their mission really resonated with me. As the executive director, I got to oversee all of IAC's programmatic offerings, which included a tremendous youth development component that we did in partnership with Janie Hip and the Indigenous Food and Ag Initiative, and really Janie anywhere that she went. She's a lifelong friend of mine and a tremendous mentor, so really happy to be able to continue to work with her. We had a significant conservation program that we were working on, helping tribes enroll in regional conservation partnership program agreements, helping tribal producers get enlisted in NRCS programs. We did a lot of technical assistance in that conservation bucket and also in the Farm Service Agency loan program bucket. A lot of good opportunity there to make meaningful changes and help producers get financed right using FSA's farm loan programs. Another of the aspects of the FSA work that I got to work in was the value added producer component. A lot of that really focused on our export readiness program, helping Native Americans that were able to take their food beyond the commodity stage, get it in a package, get it on a shelf, and start to market it in overseas food shows. And we use that as kind of a way to back into more local marketing. A really good example of the success of that program is Red Lake Nation Foods. When they first started in that program back in the 90s, their wild rice was selling for pennies a pound, and now you can buy it for dollars an ounce at Whole Foods, and it's distributed everywhere, including the Queen of England formerly having it on her plate. So the American Indian Food Program was our export readiness program. A significant amount of our time at the Intertribal Ag Council was spent on building policy solutions. And this is one of the things that I try to impart on everybody that I have a chance to run into. There's nothing wrong with being able to identify the problem, but parroting or repeating the problem is not solving the problem. So I would challenge you all when you run into an issue, try to come forward with a solution to the issue that you're raising so that you make it easier for the other person that you're trying to get to adopt that. Because more often than not, that's not the only problem they're going to be dealing with. And if someone says, here's a problem and here's a great solution and here's how you can do it, folks are more readily able to embrace that. The success that we had in the 2018 Native Farm Bill Coalition is really emblematic of that approach. We had trained our staff for the last 30 years at that point in time to be solution oriented. And when we engage with producers, we would identify the challenge that they were facing and see if it was something that could be solved by one of four aspects of whomever they're dealing with. Those four aspects are, is it a discretionary decision that that person is making? Is it a policy that they're forced to abide by? Is it a regulation that their agency has to abide by? Or is it a statute that the entire nation has to abide by? And when you go out and have a conversation with producers or you take a look at the reality that you're dealing with, understanding the difference between those is critical in being able to come forward with a solution. So because of that work that our team did in the field to develop solutions, we advanced hundreds of farm bill solutions in the 2018 Farm Bill, and we got 63 Indian specific provisions in that Farm Bill because of the work of that coalition and because we had that connection to technical assistance. We had that connection to the youth and took them and tribal leaders to town to make the case for these. We had a very successful advocacy effort there, and IAC continues to do really great work. I tease myself in kind of a self-deprecating manner and say that everything gets better once I leave, starting with this ranch. When I went to DC full time and did that job, my daughter took off and did some of the things that we'd always talked about doing. When I left the IAC and got the hell out of the way there, they grew exponentially and developed programs and had, I think, up to 75 or 80 staff, where we had a pretty dang good staff of 20, 21, 22 people. And then another of the aspects of the work that I got to do while I was at the Intertribal Ag Council was work with our team and others to stand up the first Native American agriculture CDFI that was solely focused on agriculture. So we created Akiptan CDFI, and once I got the hell out of the way of that, it's now a $50 million CDFI because we left everything in really good hands and took the belligerent old guy out of the road. So that's my background. I'll tell you a little bit about my family background real quick, and then the floor will be open. And if not, I can talk through some of the things that I've alluded to now, if there's no questions. But I'm the third generation to have the opportunity to manage our family's cattle ranch. And my father was one of the victims of the farm financial crisis of the 80s, and that really imprinted me. So to this day, and for the rest of my professional life, I'm going to try to build the financial system that I think the world needs to avoid what happened to him and some of our neighbors and some of your neighbors and parents and grandparents, or maybe yourselves if you're the same age as me. So I identify as a child of the farm financial crisis. I also identify as someone that has had tremendous good fortune in their life. I was the fourth born child to some really terrific humans, and I was the firstborn son after three girls. So there was almost literally nothing I could have done wrong. And as luck would have it, having three sisters before me, they'd cut a pretty wide swath. But that good fortune has just kind of manifested through every opportunity that I've had. I got a chance to manage the ranch. I got a chance to go to college and get out of college without any debt, but I did get out of college without a degree as well. But my family always stressed learning, whether it was formal or not. After that, when I became a rancher myself, I got in at the peak of the cattle cycle and tried to start selling into a declining market. So, by virtue of that, I needed to have off farm employment because I thought Kelsey might want to eat at some point in time. So, I was flipping through a periodical in my dad's office or in his next to his recliner chair in his magazine pile, and I came across the Indian Ag Link. And that was the quarterly periodical that was published by the Intertribal Ag Council back then. And I noticed on the back page, uh, there was a want ad, and they were looking for a farm advocate. Now, if any of you know the dynamic in South Dakota between West River and East River, those of us on the west side of the state really identify as ranchers. And those of us on the east side of the state identify pretty firmly as farmers. And there's a friendly contention there. So for a ranch kid from the western part of the state to consider being a farm anything should give you an indication of what kind of financial distress I was in. But I made a call first, asked my dad if he knew of this outfit, and he said, yeah, they were created when I was the chairman last time, and I actually voted against the creation of them. And I said, well, that's an interesting story. Let's talk about that sometime. But do you think I should apply for this job? And he said, yeah, give Greg Smitman a call. I know him. Give him a call and talk with him. So I called Greg Smitman cold, told him I was interested in the position. And I and four other people were brought on to be farm advocates in cooperation with the Farmers Legal Action Group, funded by the Northwest Area Foundation through a grant that they had to stand up this network of farm advocacy. So that's my professional background up to that point. Then I went to work helping producers because IAC did a great job of training us up and getting us into this solution mindset and helping us understand the barriers. We worked there in that program for 3 years until such time as the funding ran out and we were laid off. But I was in love with the IEC at that point because their mission, which I always uh, misstate, effectively is to help Indian folks use their own resources to improve their own communities. because what was happening through the 60s, 70s, and 80s was oftentimes it was non-Indians who had the benefit of 50 years of farm programs and the benefit of generational accumulation of wealth because they were able to come in and homestead and get access to land, among other reasons, have the same opportunities. So that funding ran out. I stayed connected to the Intertribal Ag Council because of the mission and realized that there were some policy changes, some law changes that were needed within my tribal government to eliminate some of these barriers. So I ran for tribal council in 2018 and got my tail whipped and really hurt my feelings. And I got to thinking about why. Well, I didn't work hard enough. I didn't hit every community. I didn't go door to door. I just tried to have a couple of meetings and say, if people want me, they're going to vote for me. It's not the case. You got to let people know what you're about. So I learned from that and ran again and did a great job of it in 2020 and got elected to the tribal council. And we went to work to change land tenure policy within the boundaries of the reservation. My tribe, like many of yours, had what we call a range unit system. And what that means is the land that's controlled by the tribe and or the Bureau of Indian Affairs is allocated under a grazing permit. Prior to 2003, every single grazing permit on the reservation was up for grabs to whoever applied and successfully advocated for themselves at the tribal council. So there was no guarantee you would have that range unit beyond the next 5-year permit window. And why that is important to note and why it is because that's stifling to economic development. Imagine a producer getting a range unit in, say, 2003 and knowing that they've only got 5 years to try to repay their lenders or get their conservation program deployed. There's no incentive to take a look at longer term opportunities, and there's certainly more risk perceived by the lenders and the conservation program delivery systems that we need when you only have 5 years control of that land. So we went to work on a holistic review of our tribal grazing code, tribal grazing ordinance, and came up with what we thought was a great solution. If you had 50% or more of your allocated stocking rate in your control, you owned 50% of the cattle necessary to stock your grazing allocation, you had right of first refusal in the reallocation of that, provided you didn't have any violations of the tribal grazing ordinance. You weren't overgrazing, you weren't abusing land, you weren't running tribal members off of the territory because they have a right to use it. In 2003, when we had our allocation under this new policy, there were scores of range units that didn't have a single hoof of Indian owned livestock on them. In 2023, when range unit allocations happened again, I think there were single digits of tribal range units that didn't have 50% or more Indian owned stock on them. So by simply adding right of first refusal, 4 words to that policy, to that tribal law, we inspired and enabled all of that economic development opportunity. I would wager there are probably a tremendous minority of tribal range units that haven't had some conservation practices on them in that interim. There's a lot of reasons for that. Land tenure that helps a producer be comfortable and capable to go to the conservation programs offering and get approved. But I do have to give a shout out to my successor at the Intertribal Ag Council, Carrie Jo Lawrence. A lot of the enrollment at Cheyenne River and other places is because of the work ethic and her commitment to get Indian land enrolled in these programs. So my tenure on the tribal council lasted for 4 years because, as you're probably starting to sort out, I talk a lot, I cuss sometimes, and I'm not afraid to share what I'm thinking. That is sometimes not conducive to election or re-election. So I learned in 2004 that my skills are best suited for appointed positions and not elected positions because the good people of District 6 invited me to go back to ranching by electing someone else here in our territory, which is fine and great. Uh, Dixie did a great job. And it gave me a chance to reimagine what I wanted to do with my professional life. And because of the good graces that I left in, and this is another of the life lessons that I've learned, you don't need to burn a bridge to not use it. So I left in a very respectful way. I left a letter behind. I left a readout of everything I was working on as a tribal council representative. And I left with one request. Please let me stay on as our tribe's delegate to the Intertribal Agriculture Council because I think I can do some good there. And the tribal council made the decision to let me stay on. So I was able to stay on as a board member for the IAC through the entire from 2004 on until I became the executive director in 2017 or 18. I went to work on the ranch. We did some conservation measures on the ranch. We started to develop our horse program. And in 2010, Ross Racine, my predecessor at the IAC, reached out to let me know that they were standing up another iteration of the Farm Advocate Network that I got to be a part of. And this one was called the Tribal Technical Assistance Network. And he wondered if I would be interested in coming on board as an employee to build that and train that next generation of farm advocates, but called technical assistance specialists. I was glad to do that and have been professionally engaged 8 hours a day, if you will, in advancing agriculture for the benefit of producers on a grander scale ever since. Uh, Worked as the program manager for the TA network up until 2015 or 16. Ross and the board of directors tapped me as the successor to him. I came into that role in 2018, maybe even 19. Had a chance to work there a couple years and then got the opportunity to serve as your FSA administrator. So that's my work background, my family background. The fourth generation is now operating the ranch. The fifth generation lives on the ranch. And we really pride ourselves here on this place for being a family operation with the emphasis on family, not on operation. So with that, Harley, Sandy, anybody, I would open the floor for questions if there are any. Let me take a look in the, if you want to type the questions in the chat or unmute and ask, or I can talk more. I have no preference. And I can see who's here. I can also ask people questions.
Hi, Zach.
Hey,
It's Bailey. I'm the
hey,
Credit Technical Assistant Officer here at NAVS. But I
good to
have
see
a
you.
question. So many young producers, I think, focus on how much of the loan, but you've spoken about like the how in your view. How can a young producer demonstrate financial resilience in their first FSA application, especially if they don't have like decades of equity behind them?
Really great question. Thank you. And if I get to going too long, somebody wave their hand or put their thumb up, except Gilbert Lewis. Gilbert, not you. But This gives us a chance to talk about the the statute, the regulation, the policy, and the implementation of delivery of the FSA loan programs. And Bailey's question about making yourself more presentable is a lot easier to understand if you know what the FSA is looking for in order to get to yes. FSA is going to look at four things and they're going to look at them in this order. The first thing they're going to look at is, can you get credit elsewhere sufficient to meet your actual needs at reasonable rates and terms in your community? And that's a quote from the statute, a paraphrase of the statute in case there's any sticklers for policy there. So basically, what that means is FSA in the past has been a lender of last resort, meaning you've got to fail somewhere else, not get approved somewhere else, then you can come and use FSA loans. I think that's a flawed approach, but have yet to get that statute changed despite an ongoing effort. I think we will get there eventually. But key terms in that phrase, sufficient to meet your actual needs, in statute, when something is vague, it's explained further in regulation. So actual needs is where we really capitalized on the ability to use our flexibility, and we redefined actual needs while I was at the agency. And we'll come back to that because I don't want to get too long-winded. So credit elsewhere is the first portal, if you will, to get an FSA loan. The next thing the FSA is going to look at, they're going to pull your credit report after you get a complete application in, and they're going to take a look at your credit history, not your credit score, but your credit history. And what they're looking for is, did Zach pay his bills as agreed when it was within his control to do so? And if they see any late payments on there, that raises a red flag for the FSA. It doesn't kick you out of the process, but it raises a red flag and it causes them to ask questions. Why were you late on these payments? There's another aspect to late payments that I want to come back to if we get time, but that's the second portal. Have you paid as agreed? Are you credit worthy? And I think there's a lot of flexibility and room in that credit worthiness that we could further clarify if we get the FSA team rowing in our direction. After credit elsewhere and credit worthiness, they're going to take a look at management experience. Do you have the management experience needed to carry out your plan? We got really good when I was at the IAC at helping folks understand how to explain what they've been doing in terms of management experience. So a father and a daughter having a talk about breeding decisions and when to turn the bulls out is a management decision. Adjusting a feed ration for the show cattle is a management decision. Deciding when to start haying, deciding whether to enroll in conservation programs, those are all management decisions. And you don't need to be the sole decision maker. You just need to convince the FSA officer that you had a large enough role in that, that if they trust you with some of the taxpayers' money, you're going to continue to make good decisions. So management experience is the next portal to go through. The last portal to go through is, does your plan use reliable, verifiable prices for your production, and does it demonstrate a positive cash flow? And that's another important part that we worked on while I was at the FSA. Bailey, do you have a follow-up question to any of that? That's the first part of this, but we can go back into each of those aspects and talk a little more about it.
Um, I guess with all that being said, can a, well, I think good thing to add on to that would be to show FSA that you have a plan B. Well, if things don't work out, you can also include that in your business plan as well.
Super. Yep. Yeah, good. So we'll come back to the discretion that exists within those four portals. So in working with the government, in working with the federal government, you have statutory authorization. Within the statutory authorization, there are ambiguous terms or undefined terms that the department, in this case, the Department of Agriculture, will make a regulation to explain. In that regulation, instead of trying to solve for every single problem across all 20 some federal agencies, there will be discretion conferred to the agency administrators. The agency administrator, instead of trying to make and foresee every decision that needs to be made at every county level, will do a policy that governs. Within the policy that governs FSA, there is discretion given to different levels of officials, starting with your county loan officer, moving up next to your county farm loan manager, moving up next to your state farm loan specialist, and then to the DC office of folks there. Where a lot of folks get turned away is when they leave ambiguity in their plan where a person is expected to exercise their discretion to help you get to yes. And if Bailey applies to make a loan with me and I'm the FSA loan officer, and she makes assumptions about what I should know about her business, that creates confusion and a lack of confidence in me. So the better Bailey can explain her plan to me, the more likely I'm going to be able to be comfortable to give her some of the taxpayer money to use to grow her business that I'm charged with protecting. An example would be, uh, let's say Bailey is applying to develop a kelp farm on her place and doesn't have any oceans next to her. And she doesn't explain, well, I've got this artesian well and I've seen the kelp grow in that. So now I know I can grow kelp in my artesian well runoff. And I've got a market here with the Route 66 casino over by Albuquerque because they want to make lettuce out of it. If she didn't explain that, the FSA loan officer is going to be forced to rely on what they know. And in that part of the country, the FSA is going to know some crops, some irrigated crops, some sheep, and some cattle. And they're going to take a look at their resource base and they're going to say, I don't see an enterprise budget at Diné College or University of Arizona or New Mexico State University that talks about kelp farming being successful in this region. Therefore, I'm going to use my discretion to disapprove of this plan because I don't think it's realistic, verifiable, or based on sound business. So because Bailey was ambiguous about the deal that she had in her kelp farm, we didn't even get to the terms of the loan, which is another place where the FSA loan officer can make accommodations to make this work. Give you an example of that using Bailey's hypothetical kelp farm again. Let's assume, for the sake of conversation, and because of my ignorance about kelp farming and questioning myself on why I picked that right now, but let's say it takes 2 years to get a kelp stand going. If Bailey goes in with her whole plan and doesn't know that the FSA can be flexible in the terms that they offer, including a deferral of principal and interest payment to get your crop established, the FSA loan officer again is going to fall back to what they know, and they're going to say, we're going to do a 7-year loan. Your first payment's due 1 year from today. And Bailey isn't going to have a kelp crop left at that point in time until 1 year later. So being clear in your plan can help dictate what level of discretion your FSA loan officer can or will use to help make your operation profitable. Use the tools that you have around you to be the best prepared. We did a lot of work to shorten up the FSA's loan application, but it's still confusing as hell. We had work to do yet, and hopefully the team's still working on that. We shortened it, we didn't make it any less confusing. The good part was it was 12 pages of less confusing stuff, but 12 pages less of confusing stuff, rather. So the IAC has a large technical assistance network whose job it is to provide you with guidance in preparing that application and understanding all of what that FSA officer is looking for before you ever go to the office. On the NRCS side, many places have tribal liaisons that can help you put together your conservation application in a way that's readily accessible. I found that it is beneficial, even in the worst of circumstances, to go into this assuming that the person across the desk at the USDA is there because they want to help people. And our job as applicants or TA providers or as advocates is to give them all of the information they need to do the career that they selected well. Go into it assuming yes, go into it asking questions. When they offer you a denial or a reason why not, what would it take to get you to yes on that? And then you go to work on building your justification and constructing that so that you're helping them get to yes, because the things that are within their discretion are typically going to be appealable. But if it's a discretionary choice they're making and they can justify it, you may not win at appeal. So it's best to get them on your side, get them pulling for you instead of starting with a antagonistic relationship. In fact, I've got a dialogue going via email with a producer right now. And as soon as the producer got their incomplete application letter, they hired a lawyer to start writing mean letters to the FSA. And one of the things that I truly believe is that you're at least 50% responsible for every relationship you've got. And they went into this stewing for a fight. It's going to be a lot harder to get that FSA official to get in the mindset of wanting to help them. And they could have said, hey, what can I do to get there? Help me understand how I can be a better applicant, because they're obliged to tell you. And an overwhelming majority of the time, they want to get you the services that you're trying to get at. Uh, Long-winded answer, but Bailey, I think I got at something maybe.
Yes, that answers my question. Thank you so much, Zach.
A good one. Thank you.
There is a question in the chat too.
Good. Okay, let me see if I can see it. In my experience, is there a difference in native producer getting started outside tribal lands versus within? Any caveats you can consider? Sarah, good question. A lot of it depends. Uh, I have seen native producers have a lot better luck getting started within and on tribal lands for many reasons, but I've also seen some native producers just flat run into roadblocks every time they try. There are two contributing factors to that I've seen. One is in some cases, the tribal decision makers have through no fault of their own, gotten a little disconnected from agriculture. And as such, ag policy may be a afterthought for them because they might be focusing on small business or casino operations or just trying to keep their people fed and out of poverty. And it's hard to think about the big picture of a robust natural resource based ag economy when you're faced with people literally starving or folks encroaching on your borders and trying to take what little we have left. So oftentimes that dynamic keeps young producers from getting started, middle-aged producers from getting started, old producers from getting started on tribal lands. But there's another version that I've seen happen some from my friends west of here. They come with an axe to grind and a chip on their shoulder and don't have any luck getting in. And I would attribute it to a lack of empathy for their leadership. Their leaders have a lot of pressures on them. And I believe if you don't like what your leaders are doing and you're not putting your name on a petition, maybe you should quit griping. Interrupt, be part of the solution, bring your solutions to bear, make those decisions on behalf of everybody else. So, Sarah, to answer your question, I've seen it go both ways. The benefits that producers have on tribal lands oftentimes can really be keys to success. Many times you'll see the successful non-Indian operations on tribal lands, and it's painted as though they're this fantastic businessman. You see it a lot of times in your grazing lands that Forest Service or BLM manage as well. You think, man, they must be wonderful businessmen. Well, the fact of the matter is they probably are reaping the benefit of subsidized rental rates that are allowing them to produce at scale, that's allowing them to diversify. So uh, tribal members can have those same opportunities on tribal lands if everything aligns with respect to their approach to using them and their approach to engaging with tribal leadership to help tribal leadership understand the importance of a vibrant, resilient agriculture economy, because that's the epitome of feeding ourselves. And feeding ourselves is the essence of sovereignty. If we're dependent on that highway that runs into our reservations or our tribal nations for every last bit of food that we consume, we're not sovereign at all. So the more we can develop our food economies, the better off we're going to be. Good question, Sarah. Any follow-ups, or did I answer that at all? I don't hear to follow. Any other questions?
This is just a reminder for those who just joined. Feel free to unmute yourself, ask any questions. This is just really an informal discussion. And Mr. Zach is here to lead the discussion in whatever direction you would like to go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right, I'm in Arkansas. My name is Stephen Walker. Actually, we've met before.
Yes, sir. Good to see you again.
My question has to do with the farming is stressful in itself.
Yep.
You got a farm operation, you got crops, you got livestock, you got to deal with nature. That's stressful on its own. Then you add to that trying to acquire financing. That's even more stress. Then maybe you've been an experienced farmer for a few years and all of a sudden, not your fault, but maybe worldwide events, financing gets more difficult. Prices drop. You got all this stuff. You end up in foreclosure or something like that. And what I'm alluding to is not just the farm operation itself or even the foreclosure, but all of this adds to a breakdown of your mental capacities. And now I'm a fourth generation farmer. My father was in the farm crisis in the 80s, when 79 to 80, when everything changed, then foreclosed on in the late 79 through USDA. I farmed through USDA. Bank. And then you end up selling land, losing land, and like, oh, I had to sell the farm, you know, and everybody looking down on me. But yet, I survived. I'm still farming. But it's all this emotional trauma go along with that.
Yeah.
I know even the Native Americans, we've all experienced it because we've all working in the was against all of us. But we had to work through it. And as you said, we got to make the best of a situation with anybody we're dealing with instead of just blaming them. You know,
Yep.
how can I get you to work with me? And all of this is extremely emotional. And a lot of farmers suffer mentally. Some don't even know it. And then here in Arkansas, in the past couple of years, we have a lot of farmers that took their own life because they couldn't handle the pressure of being in debt or not being financed. So in the last few years, I've been pushing hard toward these mental issues because I found out I still have some issues dealing with some things that happened to me that I thought I was over, but found out I'm not. So, you know, you got counseling and you got not holding it in, but talking with other people about it. And when I work with farmers that come to me to help them with financial assistance, we have this conversation. We have this, why are you doing this? Or you're at the point right now where you need to let something go because it's going to break you down. And when I say break you down, I'm not talking about just the operation, I'm talking about the person.
Yep.
And a lot of the person you feel okay. I don't know if this is really a question, a comment, and something you don't need to overlook.
You bet, Stefan. Whatever the heck it is, it's worth addressing. You know, mental stress uh, is a big part of farming and ranching. And I would offer that in every single case, it's about finances. In fact, when I got the chance to serve with the FSA, I got a invitation to put my name in the portal to be a political appointee. And I thought, man, it's time to put up or shut up. And I'm not ready to shut up even yet. So I decided I'd put up, but I wanted the department, the Biden-Harris administration to know where I was coming from, because I think it is tremendously terrible federal ag policy that we have farmer and rancher mental health programs as a part of our federal policy without doing something to address the stressor, the finance. That's why I'm going to be working on finance for the rest of my professional life. In that letter, I said that it's poor federal policy to have farmer and rancher mental health as part of federal policy without addressing the underlying causes. That's why we have a 57-year-old producer getting older, a disinterested next generation, and farmer and rancher suicides. If I can be part of a team that is working on those solutions, sign me up and I'll be there inauguration day. All of that being said, I want to make sure that it's clear to everybody here. There are services available to help you with mental health, and you should not be ashamed to take advantage of those services. Do that. This isn't you. I want to talk a little bit about the bad manager syndrome that I saw at the FSA and help you understand that this is part of a system. If you're feeling that way right now, it's the result of a system in which you're interchangeable, not a result of something you're doing. So when we were working at the FSA in the first couple of years of the administration, we had the opportunity to deliver the American Rescue Plan Act loan assistance to socially disadvantaged producers. And we started to roll that out, and that was going to provide loan payments to producers because of their historical treatment at the department, by the department rather. We were sued and stopped from that. But during the conversations that led up to our getting right to the edge of delivering that program, a lot of times I would get concerns raised by bankers or by FSA program staff. Well, aren't we just teaching them to be bad managers if we come in and bail them out? And that would really upset me because I might punch someone in the mouth if they would try to tell me that my dad failed because he was a bad manager. And I have been in a position of mental stress myself. When you are under mental stress that's beyond your control and you don't have a way to deal with it, you are not making the best decisions for you or those around you, or the best decisions about your operation. So it's caused by oftentimes the terms of finance that you have. I just happened to be home for the next 6 or 8 weeks handling some horses, and I just did a first saddling on a horse this morning. And that's a pretty stressful thing for a horse that was just running around out in the country living its best life 2 days ago. And I put that horse in a position of mental stress. And if I wasn't there to help that horse navigate through that and guide its decisions, acknowledging and understanding that I was putting it in a stressful situation, it could have jumped right over those portable panels and hurt itself. Now, normally that horse is just going to stand there and hang out. But because I added the stress on, that horse started to look over that fence and I had to be ready to help. Producers are no different. We are all victim to the terms of finance that are offered to us by those that are financing our business. And they may work out really great, like we see at Occupan or Forbands or Farm Service Agency if you get your loan put together right, or at Native Ag Financial Services as they start to stand up their improved way of financing, or the terms of finance could put you in a bind from day one, forcing you to have an off-farm income just to make sure that your family has health insurance, causing you to spread your attention across two entire operations. And that might not be within that producer's control. And if they don't have the right support system, whether it's friends, neighbors, relatives, formal mental health professionals, farm aides, hotline, anything to talk through that with and come to understand that, that can manifest itself in bad decisions or less favorable decisions. So when I was at the FSA, I would have my farm program team, the folks whose job it is to literally give farmers money to help them alleviate their financial challenges, were begrudging borrowers who stepped into these relationships fully agreeing to pay it all back plus interest, a payment, a once in a generation payment that they were going to get. And they'd say, well, aren't we teaching them to be bad managers? And I said, maybe you should ask yourself the same question about the services you're delivering in the farm program side. Because how many of the corn on soybean producers that you have worked with in the last 4 years have received a disaster payment? And they would pause and they would reflect and they'd think, oh, we had WIP, we had WIP plus, then we had ERP. So most of them, if we had a disaster, received a disaster payment in each of the last 4 years. And I said, how many times did you question whether corn on soybean is the right goddamn crop rotation for them? you never once did, you consider them a shrewd businessman for taking advantage of the programs that are offered. Don't begrudge the borrower for simply taking advantage of a program that's being offered by a once in a generation confluence of an administration that understands and a Congress that wants to do something about it. We managed to get through some of that, but a lot of the farm program staff didn't like to see it painted in those terms. So when we're thinking about the terms of finance that are offered, it's helpful to give an example. I worked with a producer here on Cheyenne River while I was at the FSA. He heard me talking about the changes and the improvements that we were making at the USDA and at the FSA specifically within loan programs. And he went into one of our local offices and he said, "Hey, I'd like to get one of those FSA loans. I'd like to refinance my bank debt." And was told, "No, we don't do that," which is wrong. Might be the way the young loan officer was trained, but it's not right. It's literally wrong and contrary to policy. But the producer was turned away. And the reality of that producer is they had really terribly structured debt at the farm credit system and their local bank. They had roughly $160,000 of term debt, all due in the next 2 years. So their term debt, they were going to need to pay $80,000 in that year and $80,000 in the next year just to continue to operate. It also cost them $100,000 a year to make their calf crop. So they were going to have to pay back their entire operating note and that $80,000 term debt just to continue to operate. In a year previous to that, we were in a big drought here, and this producer had to get more feed for their cattle because their FSA office turned them away from the great disaster programs that we created. So they borrowed $40,000 extra dollars, and now that puts them at $40,000 that they've got to pay back, $100,000 that they've got to pay back, and $80,000 that they've got to pay back from within this production year. What could have happened is the FSA could have said, "Man, we could structure that a lot better because it looks like you need $160,000, which is the total term debt, $100,000 to operate, and that $40,000 emergency feed loan all bundled up and amortized over 10 or 15 years, which FSA can do, which a bank can do." And that would have changed that producer's financial reality drastically because they would have went from $40,000 plus $80,000 plus $100,000 in debt payments in this year to $35,000 in payments next year by tying that all together, refinancing it, using intermediate assets to secure it, and giving that producer some breathing room. They would have then taken the difference, which is $220,000 minus $35,000 to the bank and made a huge deposit. And FSA would have a cash secured deposit as additional security in the loan they made. FSA could have forever taken the stress away from this producer by setting them up with the right financial terms. Then this producer, she and her husband could maybe have stepped away from their off-farm employment and really became full-time producers. But that's not what happened because the young lady at the local office used her discretion in a way that turned that producer away. So the financial terms in this case are absolutely causing all of the stress for the producer. I don't think in my entire career I've ever heard a producer say, you know, I just want to quit this whole goddamn farming or ranching operation because I can't get that cow to go through that gate, or because I've got a flat tire on that tractor, or even because it's not raining. It always ties back to the ability to provide for their family, ensure the next generation can come along in this operation, and see their way to another year and see a future. To me, that's the essence of the mental health and the mental stress that my good friend Stephen Walker talked about. And we've got to address finance and do finance better so that it isn't a exacerbating factor in agriculture risk. It's a mitigating factor in agriculture risk. And the team here at Native Ag Financial Services, Akiton, Forbands, the CDFIs that are out in the Northwest, they're all onto this and working on providing better services. We just need to get them more capital. Good questions, Stefan. Thank you. Anybody else? Even Gilbert.
Good morning, Zach. How you doing, sir?
Good. How about you?
Good, good. Running around as always. But yeah, thanks. Thank everybody, the whole team, everybody for this. I had a question. I just just got the email the other day for FSA emergency drought here in New Mexico. We're in extreme drought,
Yep.
and so as a tribal producer, as I mentioned, it's kind of hard to buy land off our reservation because we don't own the land here that we're ranching on. The 17,000 acres just a permit, and so I saw some of the terms or the loan amounts for that emergency declaration was up to 500,000. And so just kind of I have a meeting later on with our local FSA agent, Alan McCrane, who's been pretty good with us. So um, just looking to go that direction and navigate, and see what that holds and what that looks like. But of course, with land being so expensive, it's really hard. I always say, I want to try and go up north to Colorado where they have lots of water and kind of get away from this drought. I know Zach's always saying my cows are 2 days away from being jerky, so I need to go up a little bit north.
Uh, yeah, so drought programs, and that's a good pivot for this part of the conversation. One of the programs that's available to producers, and what Gilbert was alluding to, is the emergency loan program. And there's an additional portal to pass through for the emergency loan program, in addition to credit elsewhere, credit worthiness, management experience, and a positive cash flow. And that portal is, you have to be in a declared disaster area in an eligible county. And you literally need a letter of denial from a lender in that case, not in the case of just going to get an FSA loan, just when it's an emergency loan. You need your lender to deny you credit to get you through that. But there are other disaster programs that it would be short-sighted not to talk about, because we made some significant changes to the way the disaster programs are administered at the FSA. The most prominent of which is the Emergency Assistance for Livestock, Honeybees, and Farm-Raised Fish Program. That's a mouthful. We call it ELAP, and I'm still kicking myself every day that we didn't change the name of that program to the Emergency Livestock Assistance Program, because that's what it ends up getting called. But that program is within a suite of disaster programs that are designed to help non-commodity producers, think separate from the farm program. The other programs that are there that are really the linchpin of helping ag producers in the livestock side are the Livestock Forage Disaster Program, or LFP, the Livestock Indemnity Program, and the Tree Assistance Program for some of our other producers that are out there doing forestry, orchards, and the Emergency Forest Restoration Program. Within that statute, remember we talked about statutory construction. Those statutes are very brief. So there is a lot of flexibility in how they can be administered by the department and the FSA. My favorite statute that we got to work with of all was that ELAP statute because it's a paragraph and it's intended to be a catch-all for anything that isn't covered by regular farm programs or LFP, LIP, or EFRP. So ELAP really is an open book. So if you get into the regulations around ELAP, there are some things there that are implemented that really don't make sense or didn't make sense. So we thought about trying to change those. The first one was the value attributed to a newborn calf. In 2021, they had some severe weather late in the year that carried over into 22, and producers seeking to go in and get a livestock indemnity program payment were going to receive about $80 per calf. And that calf, as a newborn running across the scale, would bring 500 bucks. So many producers just chose not to, but a lot of producers got together and said, hey, why is this value set here? Can you address it? We were able to. And we made a more meaningful valuation of that baby calf. Another change we made in the ELAP program that is critically important, especially as we see this drought being more pervasive around the country, is FSA will now assist producers in purchasing above normal feed and help with the freight on getting the above normal freight on getting that feed to the place, or help take your stock to another place where feed is more abundant. I'll give you the example of that. We were working in North Dakota during the drought of 2021, and many producers in North Dakota were in danger of having to sell their mother cow herd because the drought was so extensive, they would have to go up to 1,000 miles to get feed. We went to work with Senator Hoeven's team. We found some flexibility in the statute, in that ELAP statute, and within our regulatory guidance, we were able to make a change that allowed us to pay for above normal freight costs so the producers could afford to go and buy hay in eastern North Dakota, western Minnesota, far western Montana to keep their cow herds together. And FSA would provide a cost share on that freight assistance. We were pretty happy with what we had done, but we got on a phone call with some of our stakeholders and they said, that doesn't make any sense for me to haul 12 loads of feed to my cows when I could haul my cows one time to that feedlot until the weather straightens up. So we changed that program to allow them to take their cows to the place where the feed is instead of just saying, no, this is what it's going to be, find a way to fit into it. So we were able to use that discretion because we were charged with getting producers in the door, not excluding folks from these programs. Another change we made to that ELAP program that's especially timely now in light of the drought disaster is we can help with the above normal cost of feed. That didn't exist until our tenure under President Biden and Secretary Vilsack made that change. In times of drought or other declared disaster, you can use the ELAP program to purchase feed and haul it to your place and receive a cost share so that you don't have to go out of business. And I want to talk just a little bit now about why it's important that the federal government be in that place. That's a very nominal investment in ag producers and in those rural economies. If you think about a producer in North Dakota in 2021 who had to liquidate their mother cow herd because they couldn't feed it, and think about the lost opportunity for 5 years in a row of record feeder calf prices and them trying to get back into business into those rising prices with interest rates rising, they're never going to make it. But because we did the important work of ensuring that the taxpayers were investing in that opportunity, we've generated more than enough revenue to make up the expense of paying for the feed and the freight to get that feed there. So the disaster programs are a key part. Again, go in there with the mindset that they want to help you. You may find some county executive directors that maybe believe in a more conservative version of the federal government. They've got a boss. Their boss is the county committee. Get yourself elected to the county committee and make the goddamn change. But I want to talk a little bit about that disaster programs. I want to leave off this conversation with some discussion about accountability, especially for our producers who we identified as socially disadvantaged, who the current administration identifies as uh, what do they call it? Woke programming. But are there any other questions before I dive into that to wrap up? I don't see any, I don't hear any. So I'm going to talk a little bit about accountability. As a young farm advocate working for the Intertribal Ag Council, we were trained a lot in the deadlines that producers had to meet in order to participate in these programs. And the thing that kept going off in the back of my mind is, yeah, but what about them? Because there were statutory deadlines imposed on local federal officials that there were no consequences for. You're supposed to get a letter within a certain number of days once you make a farm loan application, helping you understand whether or not your application is complete. And then you're supposed to get another letter in 45 days reminding you that you need to do these things to get a complete application. If that doesn't happen, that doesn't mean you automatically get the loan. That doesn't even mean that that FSA official is going to get reprimanded. So in my mind, as I was learning to navigate through these, I was always thinking about what about accountability for our producers when dealing with federal officials. Congress was thinking about that too. So Congress created what is known as a receipt for service. So when you go to your local FSA office or your NRCS office or any Department of Agriculture office, you're able to ask for a receipt for service. Basically, what that means is that I go in, I say, hey, I would like to talk about a farm service agency loan. And we would have that conversation. I'd say, I'd like a receipt for service for this. That FSA official is obliged to reduce that conversation to writing and send that summary to you. And that becomes a formal record. I'm going to share with you an alternative pathway for this because it's important that we use the tools at our disposal. Receipt for service was conceived of before every federal official had an email address. And now we all have the power to make sure that there is a shared understanding by using that email address. If I go in and ask for a loan, let's say I'm going to go in and ask for a beginning farmer and rancher loan. And the FSA official is going to say, we don't actually have a beginning farmer and rancher loan. How about our FSA direct loan that has a subset of funding that's reserved for beginning farmers and ranchers? I'll say, oh, yeah, that's what I meant. How about getting me enrolled in one of those? They'll say, I'm going to give you an application, or you can pick it up on the website. There you go. I'll say, can you help me fill this application out? And they're going to say, I don't have time. If that employee is left to fill out the receipt for service and that becomes the record, their perspective on that is going to be the only one that's in writing. So rather than ask for a receipt for service now, I would advise producers to take the initiative or work with some of the technical assistance providers that exist out there in the world and write your email summarizing that conversation, because my perspective is going to be quite a bit different from theirs. My perspective would be, well, I asked about this program and they told me it didn't exist, but they offered me this other program and told me what the difference was. And then I'm going to say, I asked for an application and they either sent me one or they referred me to a website. And then I asked for help putting it together and they told me they didn't have time to help me put together this application. What I would do is I would put all that in writing in a very nice email and say, this is what I understood our conversation to be. And this is what my understanding is of what the next steps are. And I would email them and I would say, is this your understanding as well? And then they're going to have to either reply and set the record straight and say, oh man, what I meant to say is we would just have to schedule something because I don't have time today. Or they'll have that email goes to them. You've CC'd yourself and your technical assistance provider if you've got one. So you know it went out into the world, landed with them, and you got your copy as well. And now you've got your own built-in receipt for service that is in your language and reduces your understanding to writing that they have to either validate or correct. And more often than not, if they misspoke or their intentions were poorly conveyed, they will clean it up and you're setting a tone for a better level of communication throughout your whole relationship. Because really what you're trying to do when you go to the FSA is start a relationship. If you go to the FSA and get a farm ownership loan, you're taking the first step in a 40-year relationship. That's longer than a lot of marriages last. It's longer than some lives last. So understand that you're trying to get a relationship started off on the right foot, and having a shared understanding of expectations is critical, and it's going to make that relationship go better. I've worked with folks in the past who go in there and get that farm service agency farm ownership loan and then want to go in there and club them over the head with it. Say, Jesus Christ, you just got the loan you wanted. Why don't you take the win and why don't you try to get along? Because that person across the desk still has discretion that they can choose to use for you or against you. And if you don't have the right system of technical assistance providers or advocates or personal knowledge of the policies and regulations and statutes to get that heard at appeal and win, you're victim to their discretion. to build good relationships. Understand you're trying to help them, not belittle them or denigrate them into being forced to help you. I don't see any other questions. We've got about 9 minutes left. We can sit in awkward silence for 9 minutes, or I can share with you a little bit of what I'm working on now and see if you think that, well, that's something that might be of value and maybe is worth another conversation. I don't see any contrary opinions, so I'll do that. Oh, go ahead. Is there a question?
Yeah, Zach, my name is Paul.
Yeah, Paul.
I have a son who is a Pocket Tribe member,
Good.
and I'm a 100% disabled veteran.
Okay.
Okay. So part of the question is, can we stack some of the services that apply to Native Americans, but don't apply to veterans and don't apply to Native Americans? Maybe there's none, maybe they're all jointly fall under the underserved. So the real question is, can we stack those if a disjoint exists? And I'll wait.
So let me restate it just to make sure I got the question right, Paul.
Sure.
Disabled veteran, thank you for your service. I
Thank you.
appreciate that. I wish this country did more for the veterans instead of talk about it and make more fucking wars, pardon my language. But that being said, FSA does have some aspects of their programs where they provide preferential cost shares to veterans, and veterans can get some allowances in eligibility, and that varies from program to program. Your
Right.
question specifically about stacking those is the answer would probably be no, based on what I know of the statutory construction.
Okay.
Give you an example, a historically underserved producer, a tribal member has access to a increased cost share in an NRCS program. So does a veteran, but that don't mean you can stack them to get that at no personal expense to yourself. You would take the better of those particular cost shares. For instance, a water tank that costs $10,000, a historically underserved producer can get $7,500 for that water tank and have to come up with $2,500. You can't stack them and get the full amount of the water tank covered because of the statuses there. That's just a statutory construction. It's something that Congress does not allow the executive branch to delve into. Does that kind of answer your question?
That's clear.
Yep.
Second question I have, please. I don't, and I'm dealing right now in Texas. I don't have a strong level of comfortability with their handling of the information as it applies to underserved Native American population. Where can I go to get advocacy and information to bring back in to the discussions that I'm having with FSA and other USDA entities to, I hate to use the term, but it fits, to educate them a little more fully on what might just be a particular native-oriented program. And it seems like you've talked to some of those very specifically today about aimed at just Native Americans, but I could be mistaken. Anyway, there's my question.
Good question. So want to ask Harley one thing real quick. Harley, are we going to get cut off at 1:30? So I should be quick, or can we run long if there's still conversation going?
Yeah, no, we can totally run long. And if you want to talk about your new development and programs, so you feel free to do that too.
I'd rather talk about what the folks want to. And I see I got another question from my good friend Shannon. So I'll talk about Paul's deal first. So I've never been very good at taking no for an answer if I thought I was right. But I always educated myself to make sure I thought I was right before I elevated that conversation beyond the next decision maker. So you can always go over someone's head, and educating yourself about why you think they're kind of getting it a little bit wrong in the polite way is not going to be held against you in most cases. So, for example, uh, I would share with a local loan officer, I think that you have the discretion to actually extend the term of this loan. I don't feel like you're considering our perspective. With no disrespect intended to you, I'm going to see if the supervisor thinks that they might agree with my interpretation instead of yours, because I think you could help a lot more people if you adopted my approach to it. So educate yourself, take advantage of the opportunity that you're dealing in Native American affairs, and use the Intertribal Ag Council or other Native American TA providers out there to come to a fuller understanding of whether this is a discretionary barrier or a policy barrier, because the solutions, there are still solutions in both cases, but they're different. And that's really the key piece. Tap into those resources, those networks, tap into the fact that all of FSA's rule books are online, all of the regulations are accessible, all of the statutes are there, and Indian country has the good fortune of having the Intertribal Ag Council out there with TA representatives in every BIA region, I believe. So, Paul, I can sure connect you with them if I uh, if you don't have their information.
Well, I actually went and pulled up the Intertribal Ag Council website as you discussed it earlier. So that was a wonderful piece of information, as all as the other Native American ag information you put out. I pulled those websites up, so I appreciate that, Zach. Thank you
Good,
for your time today, and it's been very helpful to me.
good. And before I do anything else, I'm going to go ahead and type my phone number in this thing here and my email address so that anybody that wants to, whoops, that's not it. That's it. So that anybody that wants to can reach out. And I'm going to go to the next question. Paul, thanks for the question.
Yeah, thank you, Zach.
Okay, so Shannon asks, tribes have ag departments creating an ag liaison ambassador position to be that middle person between tribal producers and the USDA, along with other ag entities. Would help eliminate barriers. This could ultimately enhance program delivery efficiency and effectiveness. Shannon, you're exactly right. And again, a lot of times tribes don't have the resources to allocate towards that. One of the things we worked on during our tenure there was to stand some of those up and bring people into those roles using federal dollars, because the federal government takes that approach in other groups. For instance, the Pheasants Forever or Ducks Unlimited, the Wild Turkey Federation, they all receive federal dollars to make sure that their stakeholder groups are having the best access to programs. So we thought it made sense to do that on a pilot basis to see how that could drive more ag programming to these locations. We did that in Fort Belknap, a tribe in Oklahoma that escapes me, and I want to say Wind River in Wyoming. I don't know if those agreements have been adhered to, because a lot of the things that we all thought we understood about government and the rule of law changed a little bit with the new administration, which is a whole other, not just webinar, but a whole other webinar series. So to your point though, Shannon, yes, if a tribe does have that type of resources and has an ag department that's doing those things, it can sure help educate your local offices about the realities of the ag producers that they're serving and help them come to a better understanding, which always leads to better decisions. I'm going to go to the next question, which is Shannon. Well, let's see, it was Shannon, then it was Jose. Talk about the so-called woke programs. Okay. Again, that's a whole other webinar and webinar series, but briefly speaking, I'll go over them. Over the years, the federal government has done some introspective, retrospective analyses of its treatment of certain groups of people in this country. Black farmers, American Indian farmers, Hispanic or Latino farmers, folks of Asian or Pacific Islander descent, women, veterans, young producers have all been valid. The federal government has found that all of those groups have been treated differently by the United States government in the equitable access of programming. Congress, because of that, has taken steps to create bodies of law offering better cost shares, offering program set-asides for those groups under the term broadly categorized socially disadvantaged. In certain programs, socially disadvantaged includes all of those groups that I listed. In other programs, women and veterans are not included. But the socially disadvantaged producers are the ones that the current national dialogue calls woke programs. And a lot of those are the ones that have had agreements that were signed and agreed to by the federal government and service providers, and in some cases by producers, simply abrogated the same way Native American treaties were. Unilaterally pulled back, funding taken away, program shut down because it doesn't align with the philosophy and perspective and policy direction of the current administration. Double-edged sword. They're welcome to do that. They're free to do that. That means when my team gets back to town, we're free to do it the other way. We can build out bigger programs, we can build out broader programs, and we can be more inclusive. We have to think about how do we build a bigger tent so that we get our arms around the farmers that are in distress, the non-socially disadvantaged farmers that are in distress right now, so that they're all pulling for us so that we can continue a thoughtful use of the federal government to help promote economic well-being amongst its stakeholders. So those are the woke programs. Increasing land capital market access was one of them. Partnerships for climate smart commodities is one of the programs. Some of the food hub programs, those were all rolled back, reconsidered, stalled, and then unfunded and dollars reallocated elsewhere. Again, that's a whole other webinar series that it might be worth having. Another question, I was told you have to have skin in the game. And there are very few things that piss me off more than being told someone who's willing to put their livelihood and the livelihood of their families on the line to try to step into agriculture and feed their community and the world, that you have to have skin in the game. Because the fact of the matter is, to Stephen Walker's point, a lot of times folks would rather contemplate suicide or execute suicide than fail. They've got all the goddamn skin in the game. And when people tell me that, I want to ask them, what skin have you got in the game? So that really, I'm sorry that that's the vernacular that's still used against us. And My vision of the world is one that we don't hear that. We hear, how can I help you in your circumstances where you're at today? Because we're going to be better off if we're both doing better. Good question. Harley, I see you popped on.
Oh, just keep going. I don't see anything else, but has anybody else got any last minute questions?
Very good. If there are no questions, I want to first thank all 27 of you for hanging in here for the whole goddamn thing. I really appreciate it. I hope it's been useful for you. My contact information is in there, and I will answer calls if you leave a message, and I will answer emails absolutely if you send one. And I do want to share with you just before I go, I'm creating a finance company, and I think part of the solution to what we see in agriculture writ large, but especially in Indian country, is getting different sources of capital in here. It's why I'm so proud of the work I get to do with Native Ag Financial Services and happy that I get to do this other work to try to build my company called Fifth C. It's called 5THC, and the website's there. On that website are some calculators that I built to help people think about their financial reality as it is and what it might look like under a different system, a different vision of this that's more long-term in deployment of principle, but a market rate return on interest. And I welcome your feedback on that. I welcome you to come in there and take a look, see if any of that's of use to you. Feel free to tell me you're crazy as a loon and this will never work. But the reason I think we need new capital in here is because the existing capital structures that we're all party to and have access to, and I'm air quoting access in case your camera's off or your screen's off, are having the exact outcome that they are designed to have. And we're not going to change this unless we change the way we finance things. So when I think of external capital sources, I go back to that producer whose reality I shared, who only needed $300,000 of capital, but was having to pay $220,000 this year for it. And I think, what if that producer had some of the money that lives at the Northwest Area Foundation that they invest in Wall Street? What if they invested $300,000 in that producer? And since they're a perpetual fund with a perpetual mission, what if they made a perpetual investment there? And that producer became part of their investment portfolio that then funded their philanthropic work. So this producer would get $300,000 through my company or a company like it. I don't care who does it as long as someone does it. And all they'd have to pay is that $30,000 payment. And what that investor is realizing is a 10% return on their investment, which is a pretty damn good return on their investment. So they would have a vested interest of keeping that money out there. That's really the whole approach. But you think about your philanthropies, you think about land grant universities that wonder why the hell they're not getting kids in their ag programs. What kid wants to go into an ag program when their parents have struggled for the last 20 years? So we can solve that by land grant universities being investors in ag producers in one transaction. Another perfect fit for this would be a pension fund. And that pension fund, when you think about the reality of a pension fund, you pay a little bit in over your entire career, with the deal being when you get to a certain point, you start to take a little bit out that sustains you. You don't cash it all out. So that's really a perpetual loan to that pension fund that you're building up a dividend in the future. Now, I get cautioned all the time that I shouldn't talk about this as though it's investment advice. Again, I'm not very good at keeping my mouth shut. I think this is fantastic investment advice. If you have capital, get your capital in ag production, put it there for the long term, and focus on leaving the principal there and taking a return on your principal in the form of an interest payment. I did this with my own money that I had accumulated in my federal retirement. A young lady wanted to get into the cattle industry. I said, here's $30,000. Pay me $3,000 when you have your first calf drop. And because that source of capital was there, that young lady was able to buy $2,100 calves that are now worth $5,250 on the hoof. And it's going to be easy for her to make a 10% payment to me for my retirement. I'm not going to retire yet. I'm going to find another young producer to roll that out. But that's the essence of it. It is a interest-only loan because I believe having someone use the money that I might have in a way that benefits us both is valuable and a much better investment than trusting a stockbroker to charge me 1.5% to manage my retirement for me. Because I see what happens in the stock market as we see the volatility that's created by the uncertainty and chaos that we see on a national and global level. So that's the essence of it. 5thcfinance.com if you want to take a look, provide feedback, email me. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate your commitment to being part of this tribe that wants to see things get better. And I hope to run on to you in my travels after I get done spending a couple months on the ranch playing with some horses. Thank you.
Thank you again so much, Zach. We really, truly appreciate the time you provided and the insights that you gave today. I personally found them really beneficial. It's a lot of good knowledge and not reinventing the wheel. And I think that a lot of us have a hard time not reinventing the wheel because we don't have access to the individuals that have that knowledge and those insights and education and life experiences that you have. And so we truly appreciate the time you gave today. I wanted to tell everybody that's still on, I will be sending a recap email to everyone that was on. It'll have a link to the recording. And I will go ahead and put Zach's information back into that email as well, so that if you weren't able to catch it in the chat today, you'll be able to catch it that way. In the meantime, if you guys have any questions for Mr. Zach, feel free to shoot them to me in an email. I will gladly relay them and get you connected that way too. We're having lots and lots of great feedback in the comments. I hope that you see that, Zach, that everybody is really, really, truly appreciative of this time. And I just hope everybody has a really wonderful day and great weekend.
Excellent. Look forward to hearing from y'all.
Thank you.